Hello and welcome back to the Path of Conquest. I'm joined once again by Leo.
Yes.
We will be going through our second milestone for the Wadroon. So where are we going to be taking our seed of a warband this time, Leo?
Right now, this is I think Milestone 2 is one of my favorite for every faction. And that is because we start, branching out into really and seeing really how a faction plays. And I think that the best addition, the best thing we can add to to our army is to see a little bit about what war chants are, to see a little bit about the very unique kind of magic of the Wadroon, and the best addition to the faction to see all of those things is, of course, the Scion of Conquest. So for this milestone, we're going to be starting out with a new warband, and we're going to be adding a Scion of Conquest this time.
Okay.
Now, for the Scion, there are quite a few things here that we're getting from the army builder. So let's explain a little bit what they are. So let's start by selecting a cult for the Scion of Conquest. So usually you'll notice that you only have 3 selection of warband cults, and that is the death, famine, and war. However, there is a 4th one, and that is the cult of conquest. What happens is we're going to go ahead and select the cult of famine for the Scion of Conquest. And then for a spell, we're going to scroll down, and we can choose cacophony. And of course, you can always click it as well and see what it does. So, cacophony, for myself, one of my favorite spells. The Wadroon play a lot with what they can hear, and coordinating into battle, but of course they're quite effective at disrupting the opponent's orders as well in battle. And cacophony really messes with your opponent draw events, so it's one of my absolute favorite, spells out there. And now with some of the latest updates to the game, that you can resolve more than one draw event, cacophony becomes even more important, because prior to that, when you had multiple draw events, right, you had to choose one and resolve it. But now, if you have more than one, you can resolve, more than one, and that means that cacophony is even more effective. So going back a little bit to the cults. So like we said last time, when we're selecting a cult for a character, this is the cult that the character and any attached regiments, any regiments in the warband will follow as well. What happens here is that the Scion of Conquest will start as Cult of Famine, and any other regiments will so as well. But when the game starts, the Scion of Conquest only will change to the Cult of Conquest. Now, this is a change that happens only for the specific, for this particular character. And it depends if a character or another regiment has some sort of item or some sort of special banner, right? But what that means is that essentially the Scion of Conquest can add Conquest Chant Markers into the sequence. We're going to talk a little bit about it later. So before we move on to that, we're going to add a regiment to the Scion of Conquest, and that is the Braves.
So we've not seen the Braves before.
Yeah, that's right. So the Braves are the spear and sealed version of the Blooded, where the Blooded trade the protection of the sealed for flurry and more attacks. The Braves, trade the offhand weapon for sealed and gives them support as well. So now that we'll start getting a little bit into the game and seeing a little bit the tactics and how that works. Like we said last time, when we were introducing a little bit the lore of the Wadroon, we talked about the chants, right, and how that work. So every time a regiment that is on the battlefield activates, right, and we draw their card, they add this chant in the sequence. Right, they add this chant marker. So, for example, let's say we have this regiment of Braves. We activate them. We draw their cards. Before we activate them, we add this this token to the side. And if you have for example, the army support packs, we have very nice cards with the logo of each sub-faction that is very easy for you to keep track of.
Sure.
So let's say we activate one regiment. We add one chant marker to the sequence. Then we move on to the next, and we move on a second chant marker into the sequence. What happens is that we get to choose whether we want to trade some of the markers for a bonus specific to the cult that we're playing.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, now our entire army, except for the Scion of Conquest, is a cult of Famine, which means that every time they activate, they are producing, essentially, they are creating a chant marker. The Conquest marker, right? The Scion of Conquest gives out a Conquest marker, which essentially counts as being anything.
All right. Okay. So if you have a mixture of famine and death, for example, warbands, but you also had a Scion of Conquest in there, then that could be used as either famine or death, depending on the way you want to use it.
Exactly. So, for example, in this scenario, let's say we have two famine markers. Mm-hmm. We can trade in the markers, right? For that activation, it doesn't count as a draw event, or it doesn't take up an action. You just get that bonus. For example, the tier 1 for famine is you get the shock special rule. Now, the shock special rule essentially counts as being inspired, but you get a +2 instead of +1.
Nice.
And that becomes very strong, right? So that the concept is that you trying to build up your markers, your chant markers in the sequence, and when the time is right, you spend them to get a bonus that you want to get, mm-hmm. right? And you get this powerful bonus that you can use for this one regiment. And then you have to discard all of your markers from the sequence. So, for example, if you have 3 markers, then you're chanting a tier 2, which means that you get shock, which is a +2 to inspiration. Mm-hmm. And then you also get +2 to your charge distance.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, it starts getting quite strong, yeah.
And when you're building these chants up, you're saying that you have a sequence of chants. Is it something that you have to think about when you're deciding on your strategy for your order of activation? So when you're putting your cards together for the start of the turn, do you want to be thinking about, I want to go famine, famine, death, famine, 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 or whatever it happens to be, or is this separate from the activation of the units?
So definitely there is an element of thinking ahead here. And this is quite a challenging aspect of how they play, of how the Wardrun play, but it's also one of the most rewarding parts. Essentially, you're saying that you can keep adding markers to your sequence, right, up to 3. Now, when you put the 4th, the 4th substitutes one of the 3. You don't necessarily have to use them, right? There's no set point that you have to use them. But when you put a 4th marker in the sequence, you have to substitute it. You can only have up to 3. Now, unless, of course, the regiment that is adding that last marker is a fanatic, right? Which means fanatic regiments, which is their, let's say, the incantation of each specific cult, they can use the most powerful chants, the tier 3 chants. So let's say if a fanatic famine regiment could get the flurry, and if they would have the flurry, they would give it a +1 to their cleave. Then they would also get the tier 2 bonus that is +2 to the charge distance, and they would also gain the shock special rule. Just absolutely devastating, right? Yeah. Or, for example, you have, let's say, the Cult of Death, right? That you get deadly blades. You do extra damage with flawless strikes and +1 class. Or there's this. The more you build it up, the more just devastation you bring when you actually use that ability.
So it really does become a more intricate way of playing And the choices that you build in can really take devastating effect whenever you hit that sort of sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's absolutely right. And of course, the Conquest Battlecry can be activated by using the other cults, and it has to be different ones, right? So, for example, if you have a Famine and a Death, you can use 2 to get tier 1 Conquest, which essentially you get a regiment and any characters in it get a +3 march, right? They're more difficult to actually do, but you get very cool bonuses.
Yeah, the rewards are worth it for taking the extra time and building them up that way.
And of course, the thing is that, for example, if you have a mixed army, let's say you have a warband that is called a Famine and Death, it doesn't matter if a regiment is following the cult of Famine, they can still use the battle cry of other cults. The difference is, though, that essentially you will not be able to give the a death battle cry to a Famine regiment if you don't have any death regiments to create the markers.
Okay, yeah. So the various regiments need to be on the table and performing their part in the chants to actually generate the harmonics to make it available for other units to use.
That's right. That's right. So, for example, if you're playing with 3 Famine regiments and then you activate a death regiment, that death regiment can use the Famine bonuses, right? No problem.
That is absolutely fascinating and changes up, I suppose, not only your turn-to-turn play, but also what you can do when your units are on the tabletop. So, yeah, a small milestone, but one that really starts to bring in the intricacies of play of the Wadrun.
Yes.
Let us know what you think of Milestone 2. If you have any questions about the chants and the milestone itself, drop them below and we'll get them answered for you. I've got some miniatures to paint up, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Milestone 3.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.